I never thought my own son would look me in the eyes and speak to me like a stranger. No, worse than a stranger. Like I was an obstacle in his way. It happened at the dinner table, the same table where I raised him, where I fed him when his mother passed away, where I told him stories, helped him with homework, celebrated his birthdays. But now, at 62, my hands trembled as he pointed at me. Dad, this house is mine now. His wife smirked beside him, her fingers tapping on her gold bracelet. A bracelet I paid for. My son continued, "You're getting old. You can't manage things anymore. It's better if we take over. Take over. My home, my memories, my life." I felt something break inside me that night. Something that never healed back the same. And just when they thought I was weak, just when they thought I would surrender, a package arrived. A package that would turn the entire game upside down. Before all of this happened, before the shouting, before the betrayal, before the coldness crept into my home, my life was simple. I wasn't rich, nor did I ever dream of luxury. All I wanted was a peaceful family, warmth around the dinner table, and laughter to fill the rooms of this house. I was a husband once, and then suddenly I became a single father. When my wife died, my world collapsed. I still remember standing beside her hospital bed, holding her hand, promising through tears, "I'll take care of him. I'll give him the life we dreamed of." She smiled weakly, and then she slipped away, leaving me alone with a 10-year-old child and a heart full of grief. My son didn't understand what death meant back then. For weeks he kept asking when his mother would come home. I didn't have the words to explain the permanence of loss to him, so I simply held him close every night until he cried himself to sleep. For him, I worked harder than I knew a human could. I worked in construction during the day and took a warehouse shift at night. My hands cracked, bled, and stiffened. My back felt like it was aging 10 years every month. But every time I saw him sleeping peacefully, I reminded myself, it's worth it. He needs me. He never knew the sacrifices I made. He never knew I skipped meals so he could eat well. He never knew that I wore the same pair of shoes for 7 years so that he could have new ones for school. He never saw how I counted coins quietly in the kitchen, saving for his birthday gifts. One year, I saved for months just to buy him a remote-controlled car he desperately wanted. The happiness on his face that day was enough to erase every hardship. That smile was my reward. This house is built not just with bricks and cement, but with memories. When he was 15, we painted the walls together. We made a mess, splashing half the paint across the floor, laughing so loudly the neighbors complained. He told me then, "Dad, this house will always be ours, forever." I believed him. I believed every word, because I had no reason not to. I thought love like ours was unbreakable. When he was accepted into college, I thought my life's purpose had been fulfilled. I sold the small piece of land my wife and I were saving for old age just so he could go without loans. People told me I was making a mistake, that I should think of myself. But what is property compared to your child's future? What is comfort if your own child struggles? I gave everything without hesitation, because I thought love, sacrifice, loyalty meant something, but I learned something bitter with time. Sometimes the more you give, the more people take. Sometimes, when you carry someone your whole life, they start to believe they climbed on their own. I never imagined my greatest wound would come not from a stranger, but from the child whose tears I once wiped with my hands. Before that night, I thought the worst pain I'd ever feel had already come with my wife's death. I was wrong. The betrayal didn't arrive all at once. It crept in like a cold draft under the door until the whole room was freezing. It started with little things that I excused, comments about my stubborn, old ways, suggestions that I should rest more and let them handle things. At first I smiled and agreed, because I trusted them. I wanted to believe they cared. Then the tone shifted. The smiles grew smaller. The whispers grew louder. One afternoon, I found my son and his wife speaking in the kitchen with the door half closed. I paused by the frame, thinking I might have interrupted, but curiosity kept me there. His wife said, "We just need his signature. Once the deed is in our name, we can finally move forward." My son answered, low and certain, "He's been a burden for too long. It's time we secure our future." They didn't notice me standing there until I cleared my throat. Their faces turned, and in that second, their expressions were unreadable. Shocked, then quickly schooled into polite concern. "Everything okay, Dad?" my son asked, voice soft as if he were comforting me. I said nothing. The words lodged in my throat like a bitter pill. Week later, they handed me a stack of papers at the dinner table, an official-looking envelope with their smiles pasted on. "Just sign this power of attorney," his wife said, placing it calmly in front of me. "It'll be easier for everyone." I read the pages slowly, fingers trembling. I saw clauses and legal terms that sounded more like chains than help. "Why do you need all these controls?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My son shrugged, almost bored. "Administrative stuff. You wouldn't like the hassle." "Trust us, Dad." My heart sank. I stared at the ink and the signatures that weren't mine and should never have been needed. When I refused, the room changed. Temperature, atmosphere, even the light seemed harsher. He leaned forward, voice sharp. "You're being difficult. This is for your own good. You're old. Let us do the thinking." The humiliation in his tone cut deeper than any physical blow. I felt exposed, like everyone could see the worn-out man I tried to hide. Neighbors started avoiding me subtly. Invitations that once came, every Eid stopped arriving. I could feel conversations stop as I walked by. At family gatherings, my son would forget to introduce me properly. Or he'd make jokes about my memory in front of guests, laughter at my expense, thin smiles that pierced. Once, at my grandson's birthday, my son announced he had upgraded the guest list and then quietly told me to stay out of the way. I sat there as if invisible. I remember the coldness crawling into my bones when my son told his brother on a phone call, loud enough for me to hear, "We're taking everything. Don't let Dad complicate things." Shock washed over me first. My hands went numb and my vision blurred. I sat down on the nearest chair as if someone had shoved me. Then sadness filled the hollow that the shock left behind. I thought of all the nights I stayed awake, all the sacrifices I made, and how quickly they were tossed aside. Disbelief followed. Was this really the child I raised? The one who learned to tie his shoes with my fingers? The thought felt absurd until I heard the words again in my son's voice. Anger built slowly, like something hot bubbling under the skin. It wasn't the loud, immediate rage you see in movies. It was a slow, concentrated burn that made my palms clench and my jaw ache. I remembered every time I had hidden my hunger, every patch I had sowed, every night I missed sleep to work an extra shift. Each memory became a small coal in the pit of my chest. When my son finally shouted at the dinner table, calling me a liability and saying, "This house is mine now," the room seemed to tilt. The betrayal crystallized into words, sharp and deliberate. He used phrases I'd never expect from him. Outdated, burden, in the way, as if he had rehearsed them in front of a mirror. My voice was small when I answered, because the part of me that still loved him wanted to understand. "Why would you do this?" He looked at me like he was explaining a mathematics problem. "Because we have to think about our future. You can't keep holding us back." Humiliation swallowed me whole. I felt as if the walls themselves were judging me, as if the very house I'd built had turned a witness against me. That night, I lay awake listening to the muffled voices downstairs. Plans, laughter like knives, while my chest pounded with a cold, furious resolve that would not be soothed by tears. The night after the dinner, I sat on the edge of my bed and waited for the hurt to do what hurt always did, dull into a quiet ache. But the hurt would not quiet. It circled me like a dog that won't leave a bone alone, pacing, sniffing, restless. I replayed his words again and again. This house is mine now. Each repetition made them go from sound to stone. At first I thought of my wife's photograph on the mantel, the way her smile used to steady me. I pressed my thumb to the frame as if it could hold me. Together, grief opened like an old wound, and grief's companion, disbelief, sat with me at the same small kitchen table where we had shared so many meals. Maybe they were joking, I told myself, then immediately hated that I had to tell myself such a lie. I tried to sleep and found only the sound of my own breathing, loud in the dark, betraying my racing thoughts. Memory came next, in a flood. The nights I stitched his school uniform, the mornings I woke before dawn so he could catch the bus, the coins counted silently in the drawer. Anger tasted unfamiliar at first, metallic and sharp, but it grew roots in me, finding places where sorrow had hollowed me out. I walked the house slowly, touching walls as if they were old friends who might tell me what to do. The kitchen tiles were chipped where his tiny feet had dashed. The staircase creaked like an old sigh. When I reached the trunk in my room, my hands trembled, but they did not betray me. I opened it and felt the weight of years, deeds, receipts, a letter from my wife in her looping script. Her words were a small flame. Protect what is ours, if ever our son forgets. I read them until the paper softened under my fingers. I thought about the nights I had hidden my hunger, about selling the land for his tuition, about every time I stood like a shield between him and the world. How could he forget? I whispered into the empty room. And the answer that rose was not pity, but a cold, clear understanding. People change when given the power to choose themselves. I let myself feel the betrayal in full, the humiliation of being dismissed, the sting of being sidelined in my own life. Each emotion was a tool, each cut a lesson. Grief began to steady into clarity. The fog lifted, and suddenly I could see the path I had pretended not to see before. Not revenge for the sake of cruelty, I told myself. Not to break them for sport, but to reclaim what was mine, and to teach that taking is not consequence-free. I planned nothing rashly. I counted the beats of my heart and matched them to a steady patience that felt almost surgical. I rehearsed my voice until it was calm and unafraid, a voice that would not tremble. When I needed it to be heard, I promised myself I would not be led by blind fury, but by a slow, precise justice that would leave no doubt and no loophole. In the dark, I made a list, not of names, but of actions I could take, documents to find, people to call, a single, undeniable proof to place where it would be seen. Each item on the list made me feel lighter, like taking an old coat off and finding freedom underneath. I thought of my wife again, her hands folded in a photograph, and I felt her presence like a compass needle pointing north. The man who had once accepted every hardship now felt steeled by it. The tiredness in my bones became a stubborn backbone, anger sharpened into resolve, pain smoothed into focus. Grief became the fuel, not the driver. I stood by the window until the first light of dawn painted the rooftops silver, and I whispered to whatever keeps promises in the world, "Enough is enough." I folded that sentence into a vow and placed it on my tongue like a seed. I would let nothing, not shame, not pity, not their smiles, stop me from protecting what was rightfully mine. And with the thin dawn bleeding into the room, I swore quietly, to myself and to my wife's memory, that I would make them see the price of their greed. I moved like a man retracing his own footsteps, slow, careful, pretending to forget what I was really doing. First, I became small and harmless again. I smiled when they expected bitterness, and I nodded when they expected obedience. They relaxed. That was the first victory. At night, after they slept, I took out the trunk and spread its contents across the bed like a map. Deeds, old receipts, the yellowing letter from my wife. I made copies. Neat, legal-looking copies. And tucked the originals back where only I knew. I called an old friend, a lawyer who had once helped my neighbor resolve a messy estate dispute. He didn't ask questions. He only said, "Bring everything." We met in a tiny tea shop 2 neighborhoods over. I handed him the papers as if I were passing him a secret prayer. He scanned them with a slow, respectful look. He found angles in the law I had never known existed. Protections for elders, proof that coercion voids signatures, and clauses that could undo a rushed transfer. But law alone wouldn't break their pride or their plans. People needed to see the truth, not just be told it. I needed witnesses, not just statutes. So I began to gather evidence quietly. Receipts that proved payments I had made. Photos of earlier renovations paid from my pocket. Texts where my son asked for money. I rewound memories into recordings, not to entrap with cruelty, but to show a pattern. The coldness that followed every favor. A neighbor who once praised my son for his kindness had been watching. I approached him one afternoon with a cup of chai and a straight face, and he confessed he'd seen things. "People don't talk," he said, "but I remember." He agreed to testify not for me, but because he could not stomach the lie, I planted small, believable seeds. A casual remark about paperwork to the cousin who managed the local association. A question to the neighborhood group admin about property rules. Curiosity does half the work of exposure. Once people smelled a story, they wanted to know the rest. I arranged for discreet copies of the deed and the will to be sent to places where they would cause the most quiet trouble. A workplace desk, a family WhatsApp thread, the homeowners committee. But I didn't do it all at once. Patience was the instrument, a waiting game that would let my son's own temperament do the rest. I rehearsed my calm voice in front of the mirror so that, when the confrontation came, I would speak like a man who had already won. I set up small tests to see how far their boldness would go. A polite refusal, a slow hand when they tried to take control of my bank form, a soft question about their plans. Each reaction told me more. Where they were reckless, where they covered their tracks, and who in their circle would flinch when confronted. I contacted an old colleague who worked at the registry office and learned how quickly forged transfers could be spotted if you had the right proof. He promised to flag anything suspicious. I practiced silence in public. People filled in the blanks with gossip. And gossip is its own kind of evidence when it comes from enough mouths. At the same time, I guarded my vulnerabilities. I moved the key documents to a new hiding place and changed passwords quietly. A mundane defense that felt like armor. I prepared the package, not as a threat, but as a revelation. Copies, recorded conversations, the original will excerpted into a single clear file that even a distracted clerk could read and understand. Who would receive it, and when were questions I left unanswered on purpose. Ambiguity would make each delivery sting more sharply. I recruited 2 allies. The lawyer, who would move the legal pieces, and the neighbor, whose quiet testimony would make polite people uncomfortable. I practiced walking away from bait, from their attempts to guilt me, because the moment I reacted, the game tilted back in their favor. Sometimes I sat for hours holding a pen, imagining the exact fold of the paper as they would find it. The beat between opening the envelope and the first gasp. I rehearsed the timing in my head. Wait until their arrogance swelled, then cut through it with the undeniable weight of proof. Above all, I trained myself to be patient until their own momentum did the hard work, hurrying, assuming, exposing. They would never suspect the quiet man who watered the plants at dawn. They would never imagine he had been building a case like a carpenter building a door. So I kept my hands busy with small tasks, my face open and tired, while the plan grew in the dark like a seed pushing through cold earth. And every night, before sleep, I would touch my wife's photo and whisper only one line. Let them open the package when they think they have me. The day I set the plan in motion, I felt calm in a way I hadn't in months. A still, cold readiness. I started small. A plain envelope slipped into my son's work locker during his lunch break. Nothing dramatic, just a neat stack of photocopies with the will excerpt on top. He called me frantic half an hour later, voice clipped, trying to sound casual. Dad, what did you send to my office? I answered softly. Did you open it? And let the silence do the rest. At work, his colleagues gathered. Curiosity is a loud thing in small offices. Someone texted me a picture of their faces around the printed papers. I could practically hear the unraveling through a phone screen. Then I sent the Homeowners Association a copy with a polite note reminding them of mandatory disclosures for property transfers. The association is a small kingdom of gossip and rules, and its king loves order. Next, a message to his wife's family group chat, the one where status and reputation are counted like currency, with the most damning piece carefully highlighted. The clause, showing coercion, and the audio snippet, proving the whispered plan. They reacted exactly as I'd hoped. Disbelief, then rapid calculation. Faces I had known for years turned in my direction with new questions. Her mother called her at once. The argument that followed was loud enough for the whole building to hear. I did not gloat. I watched. I let their own panic widen the cracks I had prepared. Their first twist hit me as a surprise, too. My son attempted a counterattack, storming to the registry office to prove a rushed transfer had already been filed. But the registry official, my friend, had already placed a discreet flag on the file. The rushed signatures were flagged for verification. Forged intent is easier to spot than arrogance thinks. My son left the office pale and fumbling for excuses that sounded like lies. As the hours passed, neighbors who once pretended not to notice my worn shoes now came to my gate offering condolences. The neighbor who had agreed to testify arrived with a small stack of notes confirming what he'd seen and heard over months. His simple testimony carried weight because it was ordinary and true. The bigger twist came when the package, the tidy, legal packet I had assembled, found its way to the cousin who manages the wife's business accounts. She opened it in front of her accountant. The accountant, a man who prized numbers above all, sat back and said, "This is criminal if signed under duress." Suddenly, their safe world shifted from social maneuvering to legal peril. Their smugness turned to frantic strategizing. They hired an expensive lawyer who called me and demanded I stop. I told him, with the same calm I'd rehearsed, that I had no intention of stopping the truth. When their attempts to intimidate the registry and the homeowners committee failed, they turned inward, blaming each other in hushed, bitter fights. The wife's relatives, worried about reputation and business ties, pulled support. Invitations dried up. Lenders hesitated. Then came the moment that broke them in public. I walked into a neighborhood meeting holding the original will. Not to shout, not to tear anything down, but to read it aloud. My voice was steady as I read my wife's words and the timeline of payments proving ownership. People listened. The room shifted. My son stood up, red-faced, and tried to interrupt. He looked like a child caught stealing a biscuit. His protests were thin. The homeowner's president, once a polite acquaintance, asked for documentation on the spot and announced an investigation. Their attempts at spinning the story were swallowed by facts. The receipts, the audio, the neighbor testimonies, the registry's flagged file. Each new revelation was a blow they hadn't anticipated. They had counted on shame being something I'd accept. They hadn't expected me to use the very things they valued: reputation, legal standing, community ties, to undo them. Their punishment was not violent. It was worse for them. Exposure. Contracts canceled, offers withdrawn, relatives distancing themselves. The wife's family, fearing scandal, insisted she return to them until things cooled. But she returned to a home where her influence had evaporated. My son faced a different reckoning. His employer, embarrassed by the office gossip and potential legal exposure, placed him on unpaid leave pending an internal review. He called me begging, then demanding, then pleading. I listened to every tone. I felt nothing but the slow, necessary satisfaction of having set the record straight. The final twist I allowed myself was simple and merciful. I filed a formal complaint that ensured the registry would not process the transfer while the coercion claim was investigated. I could have pressed for harsher civil damages, but my aim was to restore what was mine and make sure they understood the cost of what they tried to do. When the investigators interviewed neighbors and reviewed documents, witnesses corroborated the pattern. It wasn't a single error. It was a campaign of disrespect and manipulation. The investigators moved with quiet authority. Their conclusions did not need my fury, only my evidence. In the weeks that followed, the public unraveling continued. Invitations stopped, business connections frayed, and my son's friends, embarrassed, began to avoid him. He lost not just convenience, but social standing, the very currency he had chased. I did not dance on their ruin. Instead, I tended my garden and let the silence around them become its own judgment. There was a purity to it. Truth, once revealed, had a way of settling the dust. The most satisfying moment came one evening when my son, eyes empty and voice small, sat across from me and said, "I'm sorry." He didn't say it for pity. He said it because he had no other place to begin. I looked at him and felt all the layers. The boy who once learned to tie his shoes, the man who chose greed, and the hollow ache that remained. I forgave him only in parts. For apologies, yes. For trust, no. Their punishment was public exposure, legal interruption of their scheme, and the slow, burning loss of what they counted on. The ease of taking what wasn't theirs. It was not a revenge that broke bodies, but one that reclaimed dignity and taught a lesson in consequences. And when the dust settled, when the registry confirmed the protections, when neighbors nodded with quiet respect, I closed the trunk and felt a softness I hadn't expected. Not triumph exactly, but the steady warmth of justice kept. They had expected me to be the old man who bowed and vanished. Instead, they found a man who remembered every sacrifice and had learned how to be patient, how to orchestrate truth into a weapon. That night, I slept well for the first time in months, not because I had destroyed them, but because I had stopped them, and in doing so, I had preserved the home my wife and I had built. After everything settled, the house felt different. Not louder, not emptier, just honest again. I walked from room to room in the quiet evenings, noticing the details my wife and I had chosen together, the curtains she loved, the creak in the floorboard she used to joke about, the porch where we drank tea every morning. For the first time in a long while, those memories didn't hurt. They warmed me. My son didn't come to the house anymore. Not because he was banned, I didn't forbid him, but because facing the home he tried to steal meant facing himself. We spoke sometimes. Short calls, careful words. He was learning humility the hard way. Piece by piece, his wife left to stay with family for a while. Whether she returns or not is no longer my concern. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Revenge is not joy. It is justice, and justice is quiet. One evening, my son asked if he could visit. He stood on the porch, not barging in, not demanding, just standing. His eyes were softer than I'd seen in years. He said, "I forgot who taught me what a home means." And I heard truth in it. Small, fragile, but real. I didn't rush to forgive him. Some wounds need time to scar before they can be touched. But I opened the door, just a little, and let him step inside. Not as an owner, not as a conqueror, but as a son trying to learn again. As we sat at the old wooden table, the same table where he declared the house was his, I realized something. Revenge didn't give me back the past. It simply cleared the space for a future that could be honest, and that was enough. Moral family is not entitled to your sacrifices. If they repay love with greed, respect must be earned, kindness must be reciprocated. A home is built with love, not claimed by force. In the end, the one who protects what is rightfully theirs is not cruel. They are simply done being taken from.